Yet the desert at times holds secrets and miracles. Suddenly the imposing silhouette of a solitary elephant emerged from the mirage. It was not a predator, but an ancient force of compassion. With slow, deliberate steps, the grey giant approached the tree, its eyes, deep and wise, fixed on the hanging figure. Without hesitation, the elephant extended its powerful yet incredibly delicate trunk. With precise movements, full of a tenderness humanity had forgotten, it untied the ropes that bound the sick mother, lowering her gently to the sandy ground, as if she were the most precious of treasures. The desert witnessed not an end, but the beginning of an unexpected guardianship, where true humanity resided in the wildest of creatures. The sandy ground, scorching moments before, now felt like a chilling relief compared to the noose that had suspended her. The mother, whose name had been forgotten by the world's cruelty, slowly came to, a painful and confusing awakening. Pain, a constant companion, throbbed in every fiber of her exhausted body. Her eyes, heavy and blurred by fever, opened to a grey blur and deep wrinkles. It was not the sand nor the relentless sky, but something vast and alive. A tremor ran through her body. Was she dead? Was this purgatory or a final hallucination? The image of the elephant, which moments before had seemed a mirage of hope, was now an imposing reality, a wall of flesh and wisdom standing over her. The trunk, once an instrument of rescue, now hovered nearby, a curious and gentle tentacle that lightly touched her, as if checking her breath, her very existence. She tried to move, but her muscles protested, a symphony of agony. Her throat was dry, scratchy, and a weak moan escaped her cracked lips. The elephant stepped back, a low, guttural sound emerging from its chest. It was not a roar of threat, but something closer to a lament or perhaps a recognition. Its eyes, which had watched her from the tree, now gazed at her with an intensity that transcended the barrier of species. There was an ancient sorrow in them, and a determination. The sun continued to punish the desert, but the grey giant's shadow was an unexpected refuge. It positioned itself so that its massive body blocked the fiercest rays, creating a small oasis of darkness and perhaps of hope. The mother, semi-conscious, felt the heat lessen slightly. It was a gesture of protection no human hand had extended to her in a long time. The irony was cruel. Humanity had abandoned her to death, and nature, in its wildest form, embraced her with an almost divine tenderness. But salvation was fragile. Fever burned, and thirst was a silent torture. Every breath was an effort, every heartbeat a reminder of her precarious existence. She was on the ground, yes, but still in the middle of nowhere, at the mercy of the elements and her own illness. The elephant was a guardian, but not a healer. It could shield her from the sun, but not from the death lurking in her veins. The mother's mind wandered. Between the horror of the rope around her neck and the image of the rich woman's cold, satisfied face. That woman, who reveled in her misery, certainly didn't expect her to survive. The idea that she might somehow have escaped was a dangerous thought, but one that ignited a small ember of resilience in her chest. If she had been rescued by a miracle, perhaps there was a purpose. The elephant, as if sensing the turmoil in her spirit, moved again. Its trunk descended, not to touch her, but to gently nudge a small, dry bush nearby. With surprising strength, it tore it from the soil, exposing the earth beneath. There was no water, only more sand and rocks. But the gesture, the attempt was eloquent. It understood, it sought. The mother closed her eyes, a solitary tear tracing a path down her temple. It was not a tear of despair, but of a gratitude so profound it choked her. She was on the brink of death, but she was not alone. A being of indomitable majesty had chosen to stay, and as the elephant remained, a silent sentinel against the hostile vastness, hope, however faint, persisted. The desert, which should have been her tomb, had become the stage for an improbable alliance. a testament to life's capacity to surprise, even in the darkest reaches of existence. The rich woman might have chained her body, but she could not chain the spirit that now found refuge in the shadow of a giant. The real battle she knew was just beginning. The real battle she knew was just beginning. It wasn't against the rope, nor against the woman who had hanged her, but against time, against the thirst that tore at her throat and the fever that consumed her flesh. The merciless sun continued its journey across the sky, and the elephant's shadow, though a relief, wasn't enough to combat the dehydration dragging her into the abyss. Every breath was an effort, a painful wheeze that seemed to echo in the silent vastness of the desert. The mother, whose name was lost in the mists of pain, felt the sand burn beneath her numb limbs. Her eyes, now more accustomed to the gloom created by the giant, fixed on the rough grey skin that stretched above her. There was no fear, only an exhausted curiosity and a gratitude that kept her tethered to reality. The elephant, for its part, remained motionless, a living statue of compassion. Its eyes, however, were not still. They scanned the horizon, searching for something, assessing the invisible threat the desert represented. Suddenly, a movement. The elephant's trunk, which had previously touched her delicately, now extended to the side, towards a distant point in the sand. There was nothing visible to the mother, only the infinite ripple of dunes and rocks. But the elephant seemed to see, or sense, something her human, weakened perception couldn't grasp. A low sound, a deep murmur that seemed to vibrate from the very ground, emanated from the animal's chest. It wasn't a warning nor a lament, but something closer to a call, or perhaps an instruction. The mother tried to lift her head, but dizziness brought her down again. The world spun in a yellowish blur. The weakness was overwhelming, and the idea of moving, of even crawling, seemed an impossible task. But the image of the rich woman's cruel face, the satisfaction in her eyes at seeing her hanging, ignited a stubborn flame in her chest. She would not give her the satisfaction of dying there, abandoned, not after being saved by such an improbable miracle. The elephant, as if reading her thoughts, moved again. This time, not to tear out a bush, but to position itself in a peculiar way. It lowered its head slightly, and its trunk descended not to touch her, but to rest gently on the ground, just in front of its body. It was a silent invitation, a bridge of flesh and muscle. The giant couldn't carry her, but perhaps it could guide her, or help her to crawl. The mother understood. It was a risk. The desert was a silent predator, and following a wild animal, however gentle, could lead her to even greater danger. But what was the alternative? To remain there, awaiting death? The choice was clear, a chance, however small, to survive. With a groan of effort, she began to crawl, inch by inch, towards the elephant's trunk. Every movement was agony, her muscles screamed in protest, and the hot sand scraped her skin. The elephant waited, patient. Its wise eyes watched every slow, painful movement. When she finally managed to reach the trunk, her trembling hands clutched its rough skin. It was warm, alive, and incredibly strong. With a gentle but firm pull, the elephant helped her rise a little, just enough for her to support herself on her knees and hands. It wasn't a comfortable position, but it was progress, a step out of the abyss. The giant then began to move, slowly, with ponderous steps that barely stirred the sand. The mother, clinging to the trunk like a lifeline, was dragged along with it. It was an agonizing progression. Every few meters, she had to stop, panting, her vision darkened by exhaustion. But the elephant stopped with her, waiting, its patience infinite. It didn't rush her, didn't abandon her. It was her guide, her protector, her last hope. The sun began to decline, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, but the heat persisted. The mother knew that night would bring a new set of dangers, the biting cold of the desert and the predators that hunted under the cloak of darkness. But for now, she was alive, moving. With every dragged step, every stolen breath. The ember of resilience in her chest grew a little stronger. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. The elephant, with its ancestral wisdom, seemed to know exactly where to go. It didn't follow a visible path, but an invisible route, known only to itself. The mother, her mind clouded by fever, trusted blindly. The desert, once a symbol of her condemnation, now transformed into a labyrinth of hope, guided by a being that transcended human understanding. The rich woman in her luxurious mansion would never imagine that her victim, left to die, was being led by a gentle giant on an improbable journey towards life. With every step, every effort, the mother felt that it wasn't just her body moving, but also her soul, reborn from the ashes of cruelty. The real battle was for life, and she was determined to win. With every dragged step, every stolen breath, the ember of resilience in her chest grew a little stronger. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. The elephant, with its ancestral wisdom, seemed to know exactly where to go. It didn't follow a visible path, but an invisible route, known only to itself. The mother, her mind clouded by fever, trusted blindly. The desert, once a symbol of her condemnation, now transformed into a labyrinth of hope, guided by a being that transcended human understanding. The rich woman in her luxurious mansion would never imagine that her victim, left to die, was being led by a gentle giant on an improbable journey towards life. With every step, every effort, the mother felt that it wasn't just her body moving, but also her soul, reborn from the ashes of cruelty. The real battle was for life, and she was determined to win. The sun, a fiery disk on the horizon, finally gave way to a twilight of reddish and violet hues. As the light faded, the day's relentless heat began to yield to a biting cold, a new threat creeping onto the mother's skin. Her fingers, clutching the elephant's rough trunk, were numb, but she dared not let go. That contact was her only anchor to reality, her link to life. The elephant continued its slow and unwavering progress. Its steps, once almost silent on the hot sand, now seemed to echo in the vastness that grew increasingly dark. The mother, her vision blurred, could barely distinguish what lay ahead. The landscape transformed into indistinct shadows, rocks that looked like monsters, dry bushes that writhed like claws. Fear, which had abandoned her in exhaustion, began to creep back, a chill that didn't come solely from the falling temperature. A distant sound, a sharp, solitary howl, tore through the settling night's silence. The mother's body trembled. Predators. The desert wasn't just a furnace by day, it was a relentless hunting ground by night. The elephant, however, showed no change in its pace. Its giant ears moved slightly, catching the sound, processing it, but its determination remained unwavering. It was a walking fortress, and the mother, however fragile, was under its protection. The mother's throat was raw, thirst a constant torture that surpassed even the pain in her muscles. Every inhale was an effort, every exhale a muffled groan. She felt her body emptying, life draining through her fingers. But the image of the rich woman, with her cold smile and eyes devoid of compassion, was both a poison and an antidote. She would not die there. She would not give her the satisfaction. This rage, this thirst for justice, was the last remnant of strength that kept her moving. Suddenly, the elephant stopped. There was no warning, just an abrupt cessation of movement. The mother, stumbling, almost fell, but the trunk held firm, supporting her. The air grew tense, the howl repeated, closer now, and other sounds joined it, the rustling of bushes, the dragging of paws in the sand. Her eyes, trying to pierce the darkness, sought the source of the danger. The elephant, with a deliberate slowness that contrasted with the urgency of the situation, moved its trunk, not to guide her, but to position it gently against its massive flank. It was a silent invitation to hide, to take shelter. The mother understood. With superhuman effort, she dragged herself to the protection of the giant's body, nestling against its warm, rough skin. The scent of earth and wild life enveloped her, a strange comfort amidst the terror. The elephant turned slightly, its immense body forming an impenetrable barrier between the mother and the darkness. Its eyes, now more visible in the gloom, shone with an intensity that made her feel safe despite everything. It would not flee. It would protect her. A low, vibrating sound emerged from its chest, a guttural warning that seemed to say, "Do not approach." The sounds of the night intensified for a moment, then receded. The mother, her face pressed against the elephant's skin, felt the tremor of its muscles, the tension in its body. It was alert, ready for anything. Slowly, the howls and rustlings diminished until the desert's silence reigned once more, broken only by the wind whispering among the rocks. The threat had passed, or at least receded. The elephant waited a few more minutes, motionless, before resuming its path. The mother, still trembling, clung to the trunk with a new conviction. That animal was not just her savior, it was her guardian, her shield against death. The terrain began to change. Soft sand gave way to rockier ground, and the elevation became steeper. The elephant was ascending. With each step, the mother felt the difficulty increase, her knees scraping on the stones, her hands slipping, but the giant didn't leave her behind. It adjusted its pace, gently pulling her when she faltered, waiting when she needed a moment to breathe. After what seemed an eternity, the elephant stopped again. This time, there was no threat in the air, but a different sensation of arrival. The mother lifted her head, her eyes trying to adjust to the almost total darkness. They were on a small elevation, a rocky plateau that offered a panoramic view of the desert's dark vastness. And there, ahead, was something. It wasn't water, nor a verdant oasis. It was a peculiar rock formation, a kind of shallow cave, or a natural shelter, protected from the winds and perhaps from curious eyes. The elephant, with its trunk, gently touched the entrance, as if presenting it. It was a refuge, a place to spend the night, away from the creeping dangers of the sand. The mother, exhausted, felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her faint. The elephant hadn't just saved her, it was guiding her to safety. With a final effort, she dragged herself into the shelter, collapsing onto the cold, rocky ground. The elephant positioned itself at the entrance, its massive body blocking most of the wind and darkness, a silent sentinel. The mother closed her eyes, her body trembling from cold and exhaustion, but a small flame of hope burned in her chest. She was alive, and for now, she was safe. The rich woman in her soft bed could never imagine the strength nature had bestowed upon her victim. The battle for life continued, but now she had a sanctuary and a guardian. The rocky ground was cold and hard, a brutal contrast to the sand that had burned her during the day. The mother curled up, trying to reduce her body's volume, as if that could retain the heat that was rapidly dissipating. Every muscle ached, every bone protested. The fever, which had previously numbed her, now seemed to sharpen the sensation of cold, making her tremble uncontrollably. But, however excruciating the pain, however icy the air, there was immense relief. She was out of immediate reach of predators, sheltered from the biting wind. The elephant, a living wall at the entrance of the shallow cave, was her only source of warmth and security. Its massive body radiated a vital energy, a constant reminder that she was not alone. The mother, with her eyes closed, listened to the giant's deep, rhythmic breathing, a sound that strangely calmed her racing heart. It was the melody of survival, a counterpoint to the symphony of dangers the night desert orchestrated outside. Thirst was a constant torture, sandpaper scraping her throat and mouth. Her lips were cracked, her tongue swollen. She dreamed of water, of the sensation of cool liquid flowing down her throat. But there was no water there, only the desert's empty promise. Hunger also began to manifest, a hollow ache in her stomach. But it was secondary to thirst, a lesser agony in comparison. The mother's mind, despite extreme exhaustion, couldn't switch off. Images of the rich woman with her cruel smile and cold eyes haunted her thoughts. The humiliation, the pain, the feeling of being discarded like trash. All of it mingled with a fierce determination to live. She would not give her the satisfaction of dying there, forgotten, not after all she had endured. This rage, this thirst for justice, was an engine, an ember that refused to die out even in the biting cold. She opened her eyes, trying to distinguish shapes in the darkness. The elephant was there, motionless, a colossal silhouette against the star-filled sky visible through the cave's opening. Its eyes, even in the gloom, seemed to shine with an ancestral wisdom, a vigilance that transcended human understanding. It was more than an animal, it was a guardian spirit, an improbable angel sent to rescue her from hell. Time dragged on, slow and relentless. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour an eternity. The mother tried to move her numb fingers, feeling the stiffness in her joints. She knew she had to stay conscious, to fight the temptation to surrender to the deep sleep that could be her last. The fever came and went in waves, bringing chills and cold sweats, blurring her perception of reality. At times, she saw figures dancing in the shadows, or heard whispers that weren't the wind, but the elephant's solid presence always pulled her back to reality. At one point, a different sound broke the silence. It wasn't a predator's howl, but a soft rustling, followed by an earthy, sweet scent. The elephant, without moving from the entrance, extended its trunk into the cave, gently placing it near the mother. At the tip of the trunk, there were some dry branches and withered leaves, but with a distinct aroma. It was an offering. It wasn't water nor nutritious food, but it was something. The mother, with trembling hands, took one of the branches. It was a dry root, perhaps. She brought it to her mouth, chewing it slowly. It had no taste, but the minimal moisture it released was a balm for her parched mouth. It was a gesture of care, proof that the giant not only protected her, but also tried to provide. The night advanced, and the cold intensified. The mother felt the elephant's body move slightly. It knelt, not completely, but enough for its massive flank to be closer to the cave floor, further blocking the wind and perhaps offering some of its body heat. It was an act of silent compassion, an understanding of human fragility that touched her deeply. She crawled a little closer, resting her head against the rough, warm skin. The scent of wildlife, of earth and dampness enveloped her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of peace. Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and interrupted by nightmares. But between one nightmare and another, there was the feeling of safety, the constant presence of her guardian. She dreamed of the rich woman, but this time her image was distorted, diminished, while the figure of the elephant grew, imposing and protective. When the first pale rays of light began to peek through the rocks, painting the sky a bluish grey, the mother opened her eyes. The cold was still intense, but the worst of the night had passed. The elephant was still there, in its sentinel position, but now its eyes held not the tense vigilance of the night, but an expectant calm. It seemed to know that the day brought new promises and new challenges. The mother tried to stand, but her muscles were stiff and sore. Every movement was agony. Thirst was still overwhelming, and weakness consumed her. But the sight of light, however faint, brought a new wave of hope. She had survived the night. She had survived the desert. The elephant moved, rising with surprising grace for its size. It extended its trunk, not to pull her, but to gently touch her shoulder. A silent invitation. It was time to move on. The mother knew the journey was far from over. Water was a pressing need, and the sun would soon punish them again. But now she had a purpose and a guide. The rich woman in her mansion would never imagine that the life she tried to extinguish was being stubbornly rekindled, step by step, by a gentle giant and nature's own indomitable force. The battle continued, but the mother had won a crucial round. Dawn brought with it a chilling promise, but also the harsh reality of a broken body. The mother tried to stand, and every muscle fiber screamed in protest. Her legs, once strong and agile, now felt like columns of sand, ready to crumble. Pain was a constant companion, a dissonant melody echoing in her bones and joints. The elephant, her silent guardian, watched with a patience that transcended time. It extended its trunk again, not to force her, but to offer a point of support, a gentle invitation to the journey that was beginning. With a muffled groan, the mother clung to the rough trunk. The texture was coarse but firm, a tangible reminder of her only hope. She pulled herself up, using the remaining strength in her arms, and swayed to a standing position. The world spun for an instant. The cave danced in her blurred vision, but she refused to fall. Thirst was a fire in her throat, weakness a fog in her mind. But the image of the rich woman, with her scorn etched in memory, was a whip that drove her on. She would not die there. She would not give her that satisfaction. The elephant began to move, slowly, adjusting its pace to hers. Every step the mother took was a battle, a minuscule victory over exhaustion. Her bare feet, already wounded and swollen, protested against the sharp stones and uneven ground. The sun, still low on the horizon, began to paint the sky with shades of orange and purple, but the promise of its relentless heat was already making itself felt. The desert was awakening, and with it, its dangers. They descended from the rocky plateau, the elephant guiding her with instinctive precision. With each descent, the mother felt the risk of a fall, but the giant's trunk was always there, a constant support, an anchor amidst her fragility. The terrain changed again, from rocky to a mix of compacted sand and gravel. The air began to warm, and the cool morning breeze gave way to a dry, suffocating breath. Thirst intensified, transforming into a pulsating agony. With every step, she could feel the moisture evaporating from her body, life draining away. The elephant, however, seemed unshakable. Its steps were firm, its direction unquestionable. It showed no signs of tiredness or hesitation. Its eyes, which the mother now observed with an almost religious devotion, seemed to scan the horizon, searching for something she couldn't see. There was an intelligence there, an ancestral wisdom that guided her through the hostile vastness. It was a beacon in her darkness, a living map in a landmarkless terrain. The mother's mind wandered between brutal reality and visions of water. She saw crystal-clear streams, blue lakes, dewdrops on green leaves. Every mirage, every illusion was a torture, a cruel reminder of what she lacked. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her tongue felt like sandpaper. She tried to swallow, but there was no saliva, only the sensation of sand in her throat. The fever, which seemed to have receded with dawn, now returned in waves, bringing chills and dangerous dizziness. Suddenly, the elephant stopped. The mother, almost stumbling, lifted her head. They were in a slightly depressed area, where the sand seemed darker, and a few dry plants, but with a greener hue than usual, clung to life. The air, for a brief instant, seemed to carry a different scent, a faint and almost imperceptible aroma of dampness. The mother's heart leaped, a spark of hope igniting in her parched chest. The elephant moved to a specific part of the ground, and with its powerful trunk began to dig. It wasn't a frantic excavation, but methodical, patient. Sand flew, revealing moister layers below. The mother watched, mesmerized, at every movement of the giant. With every gush of sand, the promise of life became more real. The elephant's strength was impressive, its determination unshakable. It knew what it was doing. It was saving her. As the excavation progressed, the damp sand gave way to dark mud, and then, slowly, a small puddle began to form at the bottom of the hole. It wasn't a river, nor a lake, but it was water, muddy water perhaps, but water. The mother felt a lump in her throat, a mixture of relief and disbelief. Tears streamed down her dusty face, mixing with dirt and sweat. The elephant stopped digging, stepping back a little to give her space. The water was cloudy, full of sediment, but to the mother it was the nectar of the gods. She dragged herself to the edge of the hole, ignoring the pain in her knees and hands. With trembling hands, she tried to scoop some up, but the thirst was so overwhelming that she simply plunged her face into the puddle, drinking avidly, without caring about the mud or the earthy taste. The sensation of water flowing down her throat was a miracle, a balm for her parched soul. She drank until her lungs burned, until the dizziness subsided, until the pain in her throat began to ease. It was life, pure and simple, flowing into her, reviving every cell, every hope. The elephant watched, motionless, as if it knew the importance of that moment. It had fulfilled its promise. When she finally pulled away from the puddle, panting and her mouth still muddy, the mother felt a new wave of energy, weak but present. She looked at the elephant, her eyes filled with a gratitude that words could not express. It was not just an animal, it was the very incarnation of providence, a walking miracle. The rich woman, at her luxurious breakfast, would never imagine that the life she tried to extinguish was being stubbornly nourished, drop, by a gentle giant and nature's indomitable force. The mother had survived the night, and now she had found water. The battle continued, but with every small victory, the flame of her determination burned stronger. The desert was still a formidable enemy, but she was not alone. And revenge, the sweet revenge of surviving, was a taste she craved more than anything. The water, however murky and earthy, had been a miracle. It not only quenched physical thirst, but also watered the seed of hope that stubbornly sprouted in the mother's chest. Dizziness subsided, the fever receded a little, and the fog blurring her mind began to dissipate. But the relief was fragile, a momentary truce in a relentless war. Her body was still a crumbling temple, every muscle screaming for rest and nourishment. The elephant, her silent guardian, watched with the same imposing calm. It did not drink from the puddle it dug, as if knowing every drop was too precious for her. Its generosity was a lesson, a stark contrast to the cruelty that had thrown her into that hell. The mother felt a wave of shame for her own weakness, but also overwhelming gratitude. She stood, swaying, feeling the sun already high in the sky begin to punish her with brutal heat. The desert did not forgive. The morning breeze had disappeared, replaced by hot, heavy air that seemed to suck the moisture from her lungs. The sand, once cool, now burned beneath her bare feet, each step a test of endurance. The elephant moved again with its majestic slowness, indicating the direction. It did not pull her, but its presence was a magnet, a promise that there was a path forward. The mother followed it, her eyes fixed on the grey mass ahead. The landscape was monotonous, a sea of sand and rocks, punctuated by dry bushes that looked like twisted skeletons. With every horizon they reached, another stretched out, infinite and desolate. Her mind, now clearer, began to fill with thoughts of the rich woman. She imagined her in her mansion, perhaps sipping iced tea, laughing at her fate, certain that the mother would now be just another sun-bleached skeleton. This image, however painful, was also fuel. Rage, righteous indignation, was a fire that kept her from collapsing. The elephant seemed to have a destination in mind. It didn't wander aimlessly, but followed an invisible line, a route dictated by a wisdom the mother couldn't comprehend. They walked for hours, the sun rising and falling, relentless. With every step, exhaustion threatened to overcome her. Her knees trembled, her vision blurred, and the pain in her feet was a constant torture. She clung to the elephant's trunk whenever she could, using it as support, a living staff that kept her from falling. Mirages returned, more vivid and cruel than before. She saw lush oases with swaying palm trees and crystal-clear waters, only to watch them vanish in a blink, leaving behind only scorching sand. With each mirage, a pang of despair hit her, but she refused to yield. The elephant was there, real and solid, and that was all that mattered. Suddenly, the elephant stopped. They were in an area where the terrain was slightly higher, and the sand gave way to a denser rock formation, sprinkled with a few more resilient plants. The air was hotter, but there was a strange stillness there. The elephant extended its trunk not to touch her, but to point to a narrow crevice between two large rocks. It was almost invisible, camouflaged by the color of the stone and the creeping vegetation. The mother approached, curiosity overcoming exhaustion. The crevice was dark, promising shade, but also mystery. The elephant let out a low sound, a deep murmur that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. It was an invitation, an assurance. With hesitation, she squeezed through the opening, feeling the cool, damp air kiss her skin. It was an immediate relief from the suffocating desert heat. Inside, the crevice opened slightly into a small cave, more a recess in the rock than a cave proper. The floor was compacted earth, and the ceiling, though low, offered protection. The elephant, too large to enter, positioned itself at the entrance, its massive body blocking the sun and creating a deep shadow. It was, once again, her shield, her fortress. The mother collapsed to the ground, feeling the coolness of the earth beneath her hands. She was exhausted, but the shade and relative coolness were a balm. She closed her eyes for an instant, allowing the silence and partial darkness to envelop her. The image of the rich woman, with her mocking face, still lingered in her mind. But now, the mother felt a growing strength. She had survived the night, found water, and now had a refuge from the sun. Every small victory was a brick in the wall of her resilience. The elephant, from outside, let out another murmur. The mother opened her eyes and saw it extend its trunk again, this time towards a small bush that grew tenaciously near the crevice's entrance. It plucked some leaves and offered them to her. They were small, leathery, dark green leaves, and they looked dry, but there was a promise of moisture in them. With trembling hands, the mother took the leaves. They didn't have a pleasant smell, but hunger, which had been masked by thirst, now made itself felt with a piercing intensity. She brought them to her mouth, chewing them slowly. The taste was bitter, earthy, but they released a small amount of sap, a moisture that helped relieve the dryness of her mouth. It wasn't a feast, but it was something, a sign that the elephant not only protected her, but also provided. As she chewed, the mother looked at the elephant. Its eyes were deep, full of an intelligence and compassion she never imagined finding in a wild animal. It was the antithesis of the human cruelty that had abandoned her. It was nature itself, in its purest, most protective form. The rich woman, at her lavish table, would never imagine that the life she tried to extinguish was being stubbornly nourished, leaf, by a gentle giant and life's indomitable force. The mother knew the journey was far from over. The desert was still a formidable enemy, and her own weakness was a constant battle. But with every small gesture from the elephant, every drop of water, every bitter leaf, her determination grew stronger. She was no longer just a victim. She was a survivor, guided by a walking miracle. And revenge, the sweet revenge of returning, of showing that she had not been broken, was a taste she craved more than anything. She would close her eyes but not sleep. She would rest, recover, and then, with her guardian by her side, she would continue to fight. The sun moved slowly across the sky, and the desert waited, but the mother and her giant had a purpose. Night advanced, and the desert waited, but the mother and her giant had a purpose. Inside the rocky recess, the small flame flickered, a fragile pulse of life against the abyssal darkness. Fire, once an unthinkable luxury, was now a vital necessity, a promise of warmth that dispelled not only the biting cold of the desert, but also the ghosts of hopelessness. Outside, the wind howled, an ancestral lament seeping through the rock crevices, carrying with it the scent of sand and the vastness of an indifferent world. But the elephant, a colossal wall of flesh and compassion, blocked the entrance, its body a living fortress against the night's fury. The mother huddled closer to the fire, extending her trembling hands to absorb every particle of warmth. Her eyes, once blurred by fever and exhaustion, now shone with renewed determination, reflecting the dancing flames. Every spark that rose towards the rocky ceiling was a small cry of defiance, proof that life, however tenuous, still persisted. Hunger and thirst were constant companions, but the priority now was warmth, protection against the hypothermia lurking in the shadows. She looked at the elephant, its massive silhouette barely illuminated by the fire's faint glow. It was there, motionless, a silent and unshakable presence. Its deep eyes, visible even in the gloom, seemed to watch not only the desert, but also the woman's soul, as if it understood the internal battle she was fighting. It was the antithesis of everything the rich woman represented: calculated cruelty, cold indifference, the incessant pursuit of power. The elephant was nature in its purest, most protective form, an improbable guardian in a world that seemed to have conspired to destroy her. The mother's mind, though exhausted, couldn't rest. Images crowded: her son's face, the promise of a hug, the sweetness of his smile. This was the anchor that kept her from succumbing. And then, the other image, that of the rich woman, with her condescending smile and eyes devoid of humanity. Rage, a fire more intense than the embers before her, burned in her veins. It wasn't a destructive rage, but a driving force, fuel for her survival. She would not die there, would not become a footnote in the history of another's cruelty. She would return. Time dragged on, measured only by the slow decline of the embers and the incessant howl of the wind. The mother felt every ache in her body, every muscle protesting, every blister on her bare feet. But strangely, there was also a sense of hardening. The skin that was once soft was now rough. The muscles, once weak, now seemed to contract with a new tenacity. The desert was sculpting her, transforming her from victim to warrior. She was no longer the same woman who had been hanged from the tree. That woman had died, and in her place, a new one emerged, forged in pain and determination. Every now and then, the elephant let out a low murmur, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in the air, a communication that the mother somehow understood deep within her. It was a sound of alert, of vigilance, of presence. It was there, and that was all that mattered. The vastness of the night sky opened above them, a mantle of shimmering stars, indifferent to the small struggle for life unfolding below. The mother allowed herself to look up, and for a brief moment felt the insignificance of her existence, but also the grandeur of life that refused to be extinguished. She closed her eyes, but did not sleep. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, an invitation to vulnerability. Instead, she rested, allowing her body to recover as much as possible, while her mind traced the outlines of her revenge. Every breath was an act of resistance, every heartbeat a silent oath. The desert, with its cruel beauty and relentless indifference, was now her training ground, and the elephant, her silent master. The night seemed endless, but the mother knew dawn would come, and with it, the promise of a new day of struggle, of painful steps, of searching for water and food. But she was not alone. She had her guardian, her walking miracle, and the inextinguishable flame of her own will. The rich woman in her soft, warm bed would never imagine that the life she tried to extinguish was being stubbornly nourished, step by step, leaf by leaf, flame by flame, by a gentle giant and life's indomitable force. The desert was still a formidable enemy, and her own weakness, a constant battle, but with every small gesture from the elephant, every drop of water, every bitter leaf, every spark of fire, her determination grew stronger. She was no longer just a victim, she was a survivor, guided by a walking miracle. And revenge, the sweet revenge of returning, of showing that she had not been broken, was a taste she craved more than anything. She would rest, recover, and then, with her guardian by her side, she would continue to fight. Night advanced, and the desert waited. But the mother and her giant had a purpose, and that purpose now was unshakable. The night, which had seemed an eternity of cold and silence, began to yield. The small fire, once a beacon of hope, was now just a handful of faded ashes, a reminder of life's fragility against the desert's immensity. The wind, which had howled like a hungry wolf, calmed, but the pre-dawn cold was the most biting, seeping into the mother's bones, despite the elephant's protection. She hadn't truly slept, only dozed in a state of constant alert, every nerve tense, every muscle ready for the next fight. Her eyes, now more accustomed to the darkness, swept over the elephant's massive silhouette. It was a mountain of flesh and spirit, a guardian that asked for nothing in return, only offered its strength and ancestral wisdom. The mother felt a deep gratitude, but also a debt, a silent promise that the life it had saved would be used for a greater purpose. Images of her son and the rich woman alternated in her mind, a vicious cycle of love and hate. The boy's innocent face, the touch of his small hands, was the light that kept her from succumbing to despair. And the rich woman's cold smile, her eyes empty of any empathy, was the fuel that fed her determination. Revenge was no longer a distant desire. It was a visceral need, a force that propelled her forward step by step, breath by breath. She would not return merely to survive. She would return to bear witness, to expose, to confront. Slowly, a thin line of light began to emerge on the eastern horizon, painting the sky with shades of purple and orange. The desert, once an abyss of shadows, began to reveal its raw and relentless forms. Every stone, every dry bush gained contours, and the world, once suffocated by night, breathed again. Dawn was an efflux, a rebirth, but also a reminder of the arduous journey that still awaited her. The elephant, which seemed to have been in a meditative trance, moved. A low, deep murmur vibrated in its chest, a sound the mother now recognized as a signal. It was time to move on. With hands still trembling slightly from cold and exhaustion, she extinguished the last embers of the fire, scattering the ashes with a reverent gesture. Every small resource, every trace of her passage, was important. As she emerged from the rocky shelter, the morning air hit her cold and dry. Her feet, though calloused and blistered, seemed to have gained a new resilience. Her body ached, yes, but it was a different kind of pain, a pain of use, of hardening, no longer the pain of fragility. She looked at the vast desert stretching before her, a sea of sand and rocks that seemed endless. But she no longer felt the paralyzing fear of before. There was an acceptance, an understanding that this was her battlefield and she was ready to fight. The elephant began to walk, its pace slow and deliberate, but steady. The mother followed it, her eyes fixed on its hind legs, each of her steps synchronized with its own. They were a unit, two improbable beings united by destiny and the need for survival. The sun began to climb higher, and the heat, which would be unbearable in a few hours, was already making itself felt. They walked for hours, the silence broken only by the crunch of sand beneath their feet and the occasional sound of the wind. The mother felt her throat dry, her mouth pasty, but there was no sign of water. The search for sustenance was a constant battle, a priority that overshadowed all others. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of life, any hint of an oasis or a water source. Suddenly, the elephant stopped. It extended its trunk to the side, sniffing the air with concentrated intensity. Its ears moved, catching sounds the mother couldn't hear. It let out a low sound, a kind of alert, and began to deviate slightly from the route they had been following. The mother, trusting blindly in her guide, followed it. They approached an unusual rock formation, which seemed to have been sculpted by the wind into fantastical shapes. The elephant stopped in front of a narrow crevice, almost invisible in the rock. It pushed its trunk into the crevice and, with colossal effort, began to move a stone that partially blocked the passage. The mother watched, breathless, the brute force and delicacy with which it worked. The stone yielded, revealing a small, dark cavity. The elephant inserted its trunk again, and, to the mother's surprise and joy, it pulled out a piece of thick, earth-covered root. It wasn't water, but it was something. It offered it to the mother, who took it with trembling hands. The root was bitter and fibrous, but it contained moisture, a welcome relief for her parched throat. She chewed slowly, feeling life gradually return. The elephant then did something even more surprising. It used its trunk to dig deeper into the cavity, and the mother could hear a soft sound of water trickling. It was an underground spring, hidden and protected by the desert, known only to those who possessed the ancestral knowledge of the land. The elephant drank first, then stepped aside, allowing the mother to approach. She knelt, cupped her hands, and drank the fresh, clean water, feeling it flow down her throat like a balm. Every sip was a promise, a renewal. The discovery of water, a miracle in the heart of the desert, rekindled the flame of hope in the mother. She was not merely a survivor, she was an apprentice, guided by a silent master who taught her the secrets of life in such a hostile environment. The rich woman, in her world of luxury and control, could never imagine the strength being forged there, in the sand and under the merciless sun. The mother stood, feeling a new energy in her veins. Revenge now was not just a desire, but a destiny. She would return, and when she returned, she would not be the same woman who had been hanged from the tree. She would be someone the desert had shaped, someone life had hardened, and someone who would not be broken again. The journey continued, and with every step, every drop of water, every bitter leaf, every spark of fire, her determination grew stronger, unshakable. The water from the underground spring, a miracle in the heart of the desert, flowed down the mother's throat like a balm, washing away the dust and exhaustion of hours of walking. Every sip was a promise, a renewal, but also a cruel reminder of life's ephemerality in that relentless environment. The relief was welcome, but the mother knew the desert's generosity was always conditional, a gift that demanded constant retribution in vigilance and struggle. She stood, feeling a new energy in her veins, but her muscles still protested, her feet throbbed, and her sun-scorched skin cried out for rest. The elephant, her silent guardian, let out a low murmur, a sound the mother now understood as a signal to move on. There was no time for complacency. The sun was already high in the sky, and the heat, once a distant threat, now became an oppressive presence, distorting the air into shimmering mirages. They resumed their march, the elephant's slow and deliberate pace dictating their rhythm. The mother followed it, her eyes fixed on the giant's hind legs, each of her steps synchronized with its own, as if they were a single being, navigating the golden vastness. Hours stretched into an eternity of sand and sun. The silence was broken only by the crunch of sand beneath their feet and the occasional hum of invisible insects. The mother felt her throat dry again, her mouth pasty, but the memory of the fresh water still sustained her. She learned to conserve every drop of sweat, Every ounce of energy. The desert did not forgive waste nor weakness. It taught resilience through pain, patience through waiting, gratitude through scarcity. Her body, once fragile and sick, was transforming. Her skin, once pale, was now tanned and rough. Her hands, once delicate, were calloused and strong. Every blister on her feet was a badge of honor, every scar a story of survival. She was no longer the woman who had been hanged from the tree. She was a creature of the desert, forged in its fire and shaped by its sands. Pain was a constant companion, but it no longer dominated her. She accepted it, used it as a reminder that she was alive, that she was fighting. Suddenly, the elephant stopped again. Its ears moved, catching sounds the mother couldn't hear. Its trunk extended, sniffing the air with concentrated intensity. It let out a low sound, a kind of alert, and began to deviate slightly from the route they had been following, towards a cluster of rocks that looked different from the others. There was something there, something the mother couldn't discern, but which the elephant, with its ancestral wisdom, recognized. They approached a rock formation that seemed to have been sculpted by the wind into fantastical shapes, almost like living sculptures. The elephant stopped in front of a narrow crevice, almost invisible in the rock. It pushed its trunk into the crevice and with colossal effort began to move a stone that partially blocked the passage. The mother watched, breathless, the brute force and delicacy with which it worked. The stone yielded, revealing a small dark cavity. The elephant inserted its trunk again and, to the mother's surprise and joy, it pulled out a piece of thick, earth-covered root. It wasn't water, but it was something. It offered it to the mother, who took it with trembling hands. The root was bitter and fibrous, but it contained essential moisture and nutrients, a welcome relief for her parched throat and empty stomach. She chewed slowly, feeling life gradually return. The elephant then did something even more surprising. It used its trunk to dig deeper into the cavity, and the mother could hear a soft sound of water trickling. It was an underground spring, hidden and protected by the desert, known only to those who possessed the ancestral knowledge of the land. The elephant drank first, then stepped aside, allowing the mother to approach. She knelt, cupped her hands, and drank the fresh, clean water, feeling it flow down her throat like a balm. Every sip was a promise, a renewal. The discovery of water and the root, a miracle in the heart of the desert, rekindled the flame of hope in the mother. She was not merely a survivor, she was an apprentice, guided by a silent master who taught her the secrets of life in such a hostile environment. The rich woman, in her world of luxury and control, could never imagine the strength being forged there, in the sand and under the merciless sun. While she indulged in her ephemeral pleasures, the mother was being honed by adversity, transformed into something more resilient, more focused, more dangerous. The image of her son, his innocent, smiling face, was the light that guided her. The image of the rich woman, her cruel smile and empty eyes, was the fuel that fed the furnace of her revenge. The mother stood, feeling a new energy in her veins. Revenge now was not just a desire, but an unshakable destiny. She would return, and when she returned, she would not be the same woman who had been hanged from the tree. She would be someone the desert had shaped, someone life had hardened, and someone who would not be broken again. The journey continued, and with every step, every drop of water, every bitter leaf, every spark of fire, her determination grew stronger, unshakable. The desert was her training ground, and the elephant her silent master. Together they were a force of nature, a promise of retribution the world had yet to know. Night began to fall again, but this time the mother felt no paralyzing cold, only the burning flame of her purpose. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. Night in the desert brought not only relief from the merciless sun, but a new and treacherous threat. The cold. A cold that penetrated the bones, that stole body heat with a silent veracity. But this time, the mother felt none of the paralyzing despair from before. There was a burning flame in her chest, fueled by the newly discovered water, the bitter root, and above all, by the unshakable promise of retribution. The elephant, her guide and guardian, let out a low murmur, a sound that to the mother was no longer just a noise, but a language. It led her to a deeper crevice in the rock formation, a natural shelter carved by wind and time. The air inside was milder, protected from the icy gusts that began to sweep the plain. The mother nestled against the cold rock, feeling the day's residual warmth still on its surfaces. The elephant positioned itself at the entrance, its massive body forming a barrier against the wind and the invisible dangers of the night. Amidst the growing darkness, the mother's eyes adjusted, and she could see the stars emerging, a shimmering tapestry that seemed closer and brighter than anywhere else in the world. Each point of light was a reminder of the universe's vastness and of the smallness of her own existence, but also of the immensity of her inner strength. She was no longer a leaf carried by the wind, she was a rock shaped by the storm. Physical pain was still there, a constant echo in her muscles and joints, but now it was a familiar, almost friendly pain, reminding her of her resilience. Her skin, once soft, was now tanned by the sun and wind, a natural armor. Her hands, once delicate, were calloused and strong, capable of grasping life with fierce tenacity. The desert had not broken her, it had remade her. As the night advanced, the silence was profound, broken only by the soft blowing of the wind and the occasional sound of the elephant, a low, reassuring rumble. The mother closed her eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind was in a whirlwind of memories and plans. The image of her son, his innocent smile, was a beacon in her darkness. It was for him that she endured every step, every pain, every deprivation. And the image of the rich woman, her cruel smile and eyes empty of humanity, was the fuel that fed the furnace of her revenge. She imagined the rich woman in her luxurious palace, perhaps at an extravagant banquet, or wrapped in fine silks, oblivious to the suffering she had caused, ignorant of the strength being forged in the heart of the desert. The mother felt a cold, calculated hatred grow within her, a hatred that was not destructive but constructive, an engine for her survival and return. She didn't just want to survive, she wanted to triumph. She wanted the rich woman to feel, if only for an instant, the same helplessness, the same pain, the same terror she had inflicted. Suddenly, the elephant moved slightly, and the mother opened her eyes. It extended its trunk towards her, not with a gesture of offering, but of touch, gently brushing her arm. It was a gesture of comfort, of recognition, a silent connection between two souls who had found each other in adversity. In that moment, the mother felt a profound gratitude for that gentle giant, a being who, without words, had become her savior, her master, her companion. She knew the journey was still long, that the desert still held many challenges, but now she was not alone. And more importantly, she was no longer lost. Every day in the desert was a lesson, every night a test. She was learning to read the signs of the land, to feel the changes in the wind, to trust her instincts. The desert was becoming her home, and she, its daughter. Revenge now was no longer a desperate cry, but a whispered promise, a strategy meticulously built in the quiet of the night. She would return. And when she returned, she would not be the same woman who had been hanged from the tree, sick and fragile. She would be someone the desert had shaped, someone life had hardened, and someone who would not be broken again. She would be the personification of resilience, the shadow of justice, and the rich woman, in her world of luxury and control, would never be prepared for what was to come. The cold, Starry night was merely the prelude to the dawn of her new existence. The cold, starry night was merely the prelude to the dawn of her new existence. When the first rays of sun painted the horizon with shades of fire and gold, the mother was already on her feet, her body responding with an agility that was once alien to her. The pre-dawn chill still bit, but the promise of the coming sun and the flame in her own heart were stronger. The elephant let out a deep sound, a silent call for the journey that was restarting. There was no time for prolonged rest in the desert. Every moment was an opportunity, every step an affirmation. They left the rocky shelter, and the mother felt the dry, warm air begin to envelop her skin, a familiar embrace now. Her eyes, once accustomed to the gloom of the crevice, now swept the sandy vastness with a new perception. She saw not just sand and rocks. She saw traces of life, the wind's direction, shadows lengthening and shortening, indicating the passage of time. The desert was becoming her map and her senses, her compass. The elephant, with its majestic slowness, led the way. The mother followed it, her calloused feet finding rhythm in the soft sand, her body swaying in sync with its own. Pain was still a companion, but now it was a productive pain, a constant reminder that every muscle was being strengthened, every fiber of her being redefined. She was no longer the woman who had been hanged, fragile, and on the brink of death. She was a survival machine, forged in the furnace of adversity, with a single purpose etched into her soul. Her thoughts, once fragmented by despair, were now clear and focused. Her son's face, his innocent smile, was the image that propelled her, the promise of a reunion that made her breathe. And the rich woman's face, her cruel smile and empty eyes, was the image that hardened her, the certainty of retribution that made her fight. Revenge was no longer a primitive desire, but a strategy under construction, piece by piece, in the quiet of her mind. As they walked under the rising sun, the mother began to notice details that would have previously escaped her. A small, succulent plant, almost hidden among the stones, which the elephant with its trunk indicated with a subtle touch. She plucked it, remembering the bitter root, and chewed it, feeling the moisture and earthy taste. It was a lesson in survival, a secret whispered by the desert, and she was learning to listen. Suddenly, the elephant stopped. Its ears twitched, its trunk rose, sniffing the air with an intensity the mother now recognized as an alert signal. It let out a low sound, almost a grunt, and began to change its direction, veering east, towards a distant chain of hills that seemed to appear out of nowhere. There was something there, something the elephant with its innate wisdom perceived. They walked for hours, the sun beating down mercilessly until the hills became more defined, revealing themselves as steep, rugged rock formations with deep crevices and dark caves. The elephant led her to one of these crevices, wider and more inviting than the previous ones. The air inside was strangely cooler, and the mother felt a gentle current of air coming from somewhere deeper. The elephant pushed its trunk into a small opening in the rock wall, and the mother heard a familiar sound, the soft murmur of water. It wasn't a spring, but a constant drip, forming a small puddle of fresh, clean water, protected from the sun and evaporation. It drank first, then stepped aside, allowing the mother to approach. She knelt, cupped her hands and drank the water, feeling it flow down her throat like a balm. Every drop was life, every sip a renewal. But this time, it wasn't just thirst that was quenched. It was her mind clearing, her determination strengthening. As she drank, the mother noticed something else in the cave. On the walls, there were ancient drawings, rock carvings faded by time, but still visible. Figures of animals, of hunters, and of a large, revered, trunked mammal. It was a sacred place, an ancestral sanctuary, and the elephant had led her to it. She felt a deep connection with those who had been there before, with the wisdom the desert held. The rich woman, in her luxurious palace, might now be at a spa or in a business meeting, surrounded by sycophants and comforts. She could never imagine the strength being honed there, in the quiet of that cave, under the silent gaze of a giant and ancestral spirits. The mother was not just surviving, she was being initiated, transformed into something more than human. She stood, feeling a new energy, a clarity of purpose that transcended mere revenge. It was justice. It was the affirmation of her own existence, of her worth, of her humanity that had been denied. The desert was her training ground, the elephant her silent master, and with each day, each discovery, each lesson, she grew stronger, more focused, more dangerous. The journey continued, and with every step, every drop of water, every bitter leaf, every spark of fire, her determination grew stronger, unshakable. She would return, and when she returned, she would not be the same woman who had been hanged from the tree. She would be the personification of resilience, the shadow of justice, and the rich woman in her world of luxury and control would never be prepared for what was to come. The desert had rewritten her destiny, and she was ready to fulfill every word. The cave, an ancestral sanctuary, had offered more than just sustenance. It had offered a vision. Revitalized by the ancient water and the whispers of the past, the mother felt a new energy vibrate in every fiber of her being. When they emerged into the desert's relentless light, the sun seemed brighter, the air drier. But she did not flinch. Her eyes, once wide with fear, now narrowed with cold, calculated determination. The elephant, her silent guardian, seemed to sense the change in her, moving with a new urgency, as if it knew the preparation phase was nearing its end. She was no longer a victim. The desert had stripped her of her old identity, of her weaknesses, and was clothing her in a new skin of resilience. Every step on the scorching sand was an oath, every drop of sweat a silent prayer. She watched the elephant with renewed intensity, learning from its ancestral wisdom. It didn't just find water and food. It read the land, felt subtle vibrations, predicted storms forming long before any visible sign. She was becoming an extension of it, her senses sharpening to catch the same signals, to understand the desert's silent language. The rich woman, in her world of marble and silk, could never conceive the depth of this transformation. She was perhaps choosing jewels for a banquet, or dictating orders to her servants, oblivious to the primordial force being forged in the heart of her own cruelty. The mother imagined the surprise, the terror that would seize that perfect face, that cruel smile when she finally returned. It would not be a return of supplication, but of retribution, of a justice forged in sand and suffering. Days turned into weeks, weeks into an eternity, measured in steps and blazing sunsets. She learned to hunt small rodents with improvised traps, to identify edible and medicinal plants that the desert, in its apparent sterility, masterfully concealed. Her hands, once calloused, were now skilled, quick, and precise, capable of manipulating life and death with equal dexterity. Her body, once aching and fragile, was now an efficient machine, capable of enduring long walks under the merciless sun and icy nights with a resistance that bordered on the supernatural. One night, as the elephant grazed in a hidden oasis it had discovered, the mother sat near a tiny fire, lit with dry twigs and a spark from a stone. She gazed at the dancing flames, and the image of her son, his innocent smile, his purity, was a balm for her soul, a beacon of hope. But right beside it, the image of the rich woman, her scorn, her power, was the whip that drove her, the furnace that heated her determination. She began to plan. It was not a plan of blind violence, but of calculated justice, meticulously constructed in the quiet of the night. She needed resources, allies, a way to infiltrate the rich woman's world, a world she had left behind, but which now seemed a target to be conquered. The desert, with its brutality and beauty, was teaching her the art of patience, observation, and strategy, transforming her into a master of survival and retribution. The elephant, in one of its seemingly random detours, led her to an area where rocks were rich in minerals. She found stones that, with effort and technique, could be sharpened into rudimentary tools. She began to carve, to polish, to create. A stone knife, sharp as a razor. A spearhead, small objects that in her previous world would be insignificant, but there they were extensions of her will to survive and fight, weapons forged by necessity. With each passing day, she felt more connected to the earth, to the animals. She observed the desert predators, how they hunted, how they waited, how they attacked with deadly precision. She was absorbing these lessons, transforming herself into a predator too, not out of malice but out of necessity, out of justice. She became the personification of the desert's law: survive, adapt, and when necessary, fight with unshakable ferocity. One day the elephant stopped again, but this time it wasn't a warning sign but a direction. It extended its trunk towards the horizon, towards a faint line barely distinguishable from the sky. It was the edge of the desert, the promise of a world beyond sand and rocks. The mother felt a shiver. The journey of survival was nearing its end. The journey of retribution was about to begin. But the desert wouldn't let her go so easily. Before they reached that distant line, they faced a final challenge, an ultimate test. A sandstorm. Not a breeze, but a fury of nature, a wall of sand and wind that swallowed the horizon, transforming day into a reddish, suffocating twilight. The elephant, with its imposing mass, tried to protect her, lowering itself and enveloping her with its body. The mother clung to it, feeling the sand whip her skin, the wind howl in her ears, the desert roaring its farewell. It was the desert, testing her one last time, asking if she was worthy of her new strength. She closed her eyes, but not in fear. With fierce acceptance, she had faced death, hunger, thirst, hopelessness. A sandstorm was just another obstacle to overcome. When the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a heavy silence and a rewritten landscape, the mother emerged from the elephant's shelter, covered in sand but unharmed. Her lungs burned, her eyes were irritated, but her spirit was unbreakable. She looked at the elephant, and it looked back at her, a mutual recognition of their resilience, of their partnership forged in adversity. The line on the horizon was clearer now, the edge of the desert, and beyond it, the world that had rejected her, the world where the rich woman lived in her ivory tower. She knew the transition would be difficult. The civilized world, with its rules and hypocrisies, would be a different challenge from the desert. But she was ready. The desert had taught her to be patient, to be cunning, to be ruthless when necessary. She was no longer the sick and fragile woman who had been hanged from the tree. She was the personification of revenge, the shadow of justice, and the rich woman, in her world of luxury and control, would never be prepared for what was to come. The desert had rewritten her destiny, and she was ready to fulfill every word, every promise whispered under the stars. The countdown had begun. The line on the horizon, once a distant promise, was now a door to a world she had left behind, a world of concrete and lies, of rules and hypocrisies. The elephant stopped, its imposing mass a final punctuation mark on the desert landscape. It would go no further. It was the boundary of its realm, the end of its journey as a guide. The mother felt a knot in her throat, a strange mix of gratitude and a silent ache for the imminent farewell. She touched the giant's rough trunk, her eyes meeting its in a wordless goodbye. There was an ancestral wisdom in that gaze, an understanding that the cycle was complete. It had saved her, transformed her, and now she was ready to walk alone. With a final nod, the elephant turned, its majestic silhouette slowly diminishing against the setting sun, returning to its domain of sand and silence. The mother stood there watching until it was just an indistinct speck, then nothing. Solitude enveloped her, but it was not the solitude of despair, but the solitude of strength, of independence. She was alone, but not helpless. The desert had given her the tools, and the elephant the courage to use them. The countdown had ended. The hour of retribution finally had arrived. The world beyond the desert was a shock to her senses. The smells of pollution, the sounds of engines and hurried voices, the rush of people barely seeing each other. She blended in, a shadow among shadows, using the desert's lessons to become invisible. Observation, patience, the ability to read hidden intentions in every gesture, every glance. She had no money, no contacts, but she had an iron will and a mind sharp as the stone knife she still carried, hidden beneath her improvised clothes. Her body, once fragile, was now an efficient machine, capable of enduring long walks and sleepless nights. Her mind, once blurred by pain, was now a labyrinth of strategies, every step calculated, every move thought out. She started on the fringes of society, listening to conversations in cheap cafes, reading discarded newspapers, collecting fragments of information like a desert predator patiently tracking its prey. The rich woman, she discovered, continued her life of opulence, oblivious to the approaching shadow. Parties, travels, new investments, an empire of luxury built on exploitation and cruelty. The memory of the woman hanging from the tree was, to her, a cruel anecdote, a reminder of her absolute power. She would never imagine that the seed of her own destruction had been planted in that act of barbarity, watered by the desert's sand and sun. The mother knew that true revenge would not be brute violence but dismantling. The rich woman lived on appearances, on an impeccable reputation, on power built on lies and manipulations. The mother, with the cunning learned from desert predators, began to identify the cracks in the foundation of that empire. She used her intelligence to infiltrate, not as an invader, but as a shadow, materializing in the most unexpected places. She became the silent cleaner, the discreet delivery person, the invisible observer at elite social events. Every day was a new lesson, every piece of information, a puzzle piece. She uncovered illicit transactions, dark secrets, ruined lives that paved the rich woman's path to the top. She did not seek physical confrontation, but truth. Truth was her most potent weapon, forged in the quiet of the desert and sharpened by the pain of injustice. The rich woman, in her palace of marble and silk, felt a subtle shift in the air. Small setbacks, strange rumors, suspicious glances. Her control, once absolute, seemed to slip through her fingers. She attributed everything to envy, to competition, never imagining that the source of her discomfort was the woman she had condemned to death, now a silent and relentless force. The climax came at a gala event, the peak of the rich woman's ostentation. The mother, dressed simply, but with a dignity that outshone the glitter of others' jewels, was there, not to confront directly, but to expose. She had collected irrefutable evidence, documents, testimonies, the web of corruption and cruelty that sustained the rich woman's facade. At the right moment, when all eyes were on the hostess, the mother made her move, not a shout, not a threat, but a silent and devastating revelation. The meticulously compiled information was discreetly distributed, planting the seeds of doubt and scandal. Whispers spread like wildfire, looks of admiration turned to shock, then to revulsion. The rich woman, confronted not by a weak victim, but by an unshakable force of truth and resilience, watched her world crumble. It wasn't a sword blow, but a slow and painful unraveling, every secret exposed, every lie revealed. Her empire, built on sand, began to collapse under the weight of truth. She tried to deny, tried to fight, but the mother had anticipated every move, every excuse. The desert's justice was relentless, and the rich woman was not prepared for its arrival. Her fortune evaporated, her allies abandoned her, her reputation was destroyed. She lost everything she valued, her power, her status, her image. The mother felt no joy in the rich woman's downfall, only a deep sense of completion. Justice had been served. With her mission accomplished, the mother sought no glory or recognition. She walked away, an anonymous figure in the crowd, carrying with her the scars of the desert and the wisdom of the elephant. She had found her own strength, her own voice. The desert had stripped her of her old identity, of her weaknesses, and had clothed her in a new skin of resilience and purpose. She was no longer the sick and fragile woman who had been hanged from the tree. She was the personification of resilience, the shadow of justice. And the rich woman, in her world of luxury and control, would never be prepared for what was to come. The desert had rewritten her destiny, and she had fulfilled every word, every promise whispered under the stars. Her journey of retribution had come to an end, and a new journey, that of peace and reconstruction, was just beginning.